After the Supreme Court granted Donald Trump broad, sweeping immunity from criminal prosecution, after it laid the foundation through rulings on dark money and voter suppression to allow an aspiring fascist like Donald Trump to take the presidency, you'd think a little gratitude would be in order for the architect of that court, a man named Leonard Leo, the dark money impresario of the Federalist Society, who chose all of Trump's judges in the first Trump administration. But a narcissist like Trump cannot be grateful. He demands absolute fealty. And in a tirade last night on Truth Social, we saw Donald Trump unleash on his former judicial kingmaker, Mr. Leo, calling him a sleazebag, telling the world that he probably hates America in his own way, lamenting that Leo is claiming ownership of judges and justices of the Supreme Court. Underlying these objections to Leo is a case that Leo's allies are bringing to challenge Trump's tariffs. A Leo-chosen, Trump-appointed judge from the first term on the Court of International Trade in Manhattan was part of a panel that blocked Trump's tariffs, and Trump is not having it. So we are out in the open with this full-on MAGA brawl. We are thrilled to be joined today here on Midas Touch Legal AF with court accountability by the person who is perhaps most responsible for public understanding about Leonard Leo's role in capturing, weaponizing the Supreme Court on behalf of billionaire anti-regulatory fossil fuel interests, the great senator from the equally great state of Rhode Island, my former boss in the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Thank you so much for joining us again here on Midas Touch Legal AF. Thrilled to be with you and my partner, Lisa Graves. Senator Whitehouse, what do you make of this brawl between Trump and Mr. Leo?
First of all, this whole thing is hysterical in every literal sense of that word. And as you pointed out, Leonard Leo is the billionaire's court fixer. That's been his role since Harriet Miers got knocked out for Sam Alito, with Leonard Leo in the thick of all of that all those years ago. The infamous painting of Clarence Thomas with his billionaire donor, Harlan Crow. Also, at of course, Harlan Crow's huge estate in the Adirondacks. In the painting is also Leonard Leo. And for what it's worth, the guy who's now counsel to that creep Russell Vogt over at OMB, administering Trump MAGA destruction of government. But there's Leo. He's right in the picture. He's the guy who traveled on the plane with Alito on the fishing trip to Alaska, where they had the $1,000 bottles of wine. So he's in the thick of this whole mess. And the fact that Trump is furious with him right now may have just to do with the fact that Leo-aligned groups brought the tariff suit and lined up against Trump on that. But it also may signal a dawning realization by Donald Trump that he actually might not have truly chosen his Supreme Court appointees. That Leonard Leo and Don McGahn, his White House counsel, who are running that process and doing the selection, might actually have been really the agents of somebody completely else. And that Trump was the chump in the scheme who did not know he was being played by the wily Koch brothers and the billionaire interest behind Leonard Leo. So it makes for a very interesting row, and it adds a little bit of potential momentum to my pet theory, which is that House of Trump made peace with House of Koch back in the 2016 election, when the Kochs hated Trump and vice versa, with a swap. And the swap was the Kochs would shut up and stop beating up Trump and let him run his campaign and actually put a lot of field support into the Republican Party. And in return, Trump would let them choose his Supreme Court justices and maybe more. And then, of course, if you're a seasoned business person like the Kochs, the last thing you'll do is trust a legendary scoundrel and liar like Trump. So the deal couldn't happen as a secret promise. They had to create the so-called Federalist Society list that publicly bound Trump to that promise. And then the Kochs could shut up and go away and stop battering him. And of course, the Federalist Society had nothing to do with the so-called Federalist Society list. It was never on a Federalist Society agenda. There was never a Federalist Society vote. It was called that, but it was really the Leonard Leo, Koch brothers, creepy billionaires list. And, I don't think Trump likes being fooled more than anybody else. So stand by for more fireworks between Kochs who hate Trump and Leo who conned Trump and Trump who now has realized he's the chump in the story.
Yeah, that is so evocative, Senator. It's so nice to see you. And
You too, Lisa.
Be here with you both in the aftermath of this public fight between Donald Trump and Leonard Leo. And, it really strikes me what you said, Senator, about the role of the Kochs, because, Charles Koch's political empire, as you point out, really got the field out to help in 2016, even though Charles Koch was writing on positive PR that he was not specifically endorsing Trump himself. Their field operation really buoyed Trump and helped sweep him into office, as well as getting him control of the Senate and putting Mitch McConnell, at the helm there in terms of the sequence for judicial nominations as well. And so when you talk about creepy billionaires, one of the billionaires who had sort of receded from the spotlight with Donald Trump and Elon Musk taking up so much of the attention is Charles Koch, who's been winning a lot at the Supreme Court. And so I wonder if you could touch on that.
Yeah, well, the other piece in all of this is that the capture of the Supreme Court has been pretty good for Trump. Getting presidential immunity, for instance, is a big deal for somebody who's a convicted criminal and up to no good constantly in the Oval Office and the most flagrantly corrupt president America has ever seen. So that is a huge gift to Trump. But if you sort of stretch out your lens and look at where the Supreme Court has been going, particularly on the deregulatory stuff, which Trump doesn't really care about. He's a real estate guy. The deregulatory stuff is heavily the polluters, the Kochs and the fossil fuel operation. And if you look at that, what you see is a continuing operation with, I don't know, maybe 50 front groups that come in little flotillas of a dozen or so in all of these cases with a lot of common funding from this right-wing creepy billionaire and trust fund setup. And they tell the court what to do. And they have, by my count, a perfect record of winning. Maybe not everything they asked for, but as to the direction the court took, even if it means overruling previous decisions, perfect record. So the court is actually being run by and for the benefit of the Koch brothers and that dark money network far more than it's been involved to benefit Trump. They have, in fact, you're right, Lisa, they have, in fact, been the continuing big winners.
Yeah.
And no surprise, since they picked the judges and got them there, and they're, clearly in some sort of communication. I was joking
they
last
built
night.
a whole network of these phony amici who come in these orchestrated flotillas and don't disclose that they're all funded by the same entities and pretend that they're independent. My personal favorite was when one of Leonard Leo's front groups came in under the legal fiction name that it's allowed to operate under. Under law, literally, it's called its fictitious name.
Yes.
And they filed the brief under the fictitious name without relating to the court and the other parties that the real entity behind the fictitious name is Leonard Leo's primary court fixery operation that spent millions of dollars. Oh, guess what? Supporting the confirmation of the justices who were reading the brief.
Yep.
I'd love to dig in a little bit more about the extent you see of alignment between this court majority, this Koch-Leo court majority, and MAGA and the Trump administration. Of course, Project 2025, which Trump publicly distanced himself during the campaign, but his administration is full of Project 2025 operatives. We did a bunch of research and showed a huge amount of alignment between the funders behind Leo's court capture operation and Project 2025.
Yep.
And if you look at the ways in which Trump's first 4 months have unfolded, it's the Project 2025 agenda. Let's be clear. Some of it is a big part of it is this anti-regulatory attack on the regulatory state, on public agencies. And there was a big case last week that I think implicates this and shows where there is this alignment, but also maybe hints of the misalignment that we saw blow up in this tweet last night from Trump. But this was the shadow docket case that seems to have delivered the 40-year-old plan to wipe out Humphrey's Executor, the 1935 foundational case that protected your powers as Congress to protect independent agency heads from firings without cause. And in doing so, they wiped out protections for labor, the National Labor Relations Board, for merit systems protections, stuff that really protects everyday people, workers, consumers. That stuff's all going to go very much in line with this interest-backed agenda. But they made this carve out for the Federal Reserve. It doesn't seem to be very principled. Justice Kagan did a really good job calling this out. There's no real distinction that they can draw. But here they go, into the breach with this. And again, this seems to help Trump. But at the same time, Trump maybe just doesn't see this, and whenever even the slightest hint of pushback from these judges, he's gonna blow his lid, because he just thinks judges should be people like Emil Bove, his personal defense lawyer, who's been nominated to the Third Circuit. How do you see this kind of unfolding as these tensions arise, particularly as there this escalating clash between the judiciary and the executive branch over who gets to decide these questions?
Yeah, well, the victim of the crime here is the United States Congress, which has now been told by the Supreme Court that the elected Congress of the United States, the Article I power, is not allowed to concern itself with depoliticizing certain government functions that are particularly technical in nature and potentially particularly dangerous, like uncontrolled pollution or massive fraud in the mortgage industry. Where did we ever see that? And so that's the piece that is missing here. They talk only about the value of the executive branch, and it is peculiar that at a time when the most politicized, most partisan, most dishonest and dishonorable White House operation ever, as best I can tell, is in full fluorescence over there in the Oval Office, they pick this moment to say, no, we need to make sure that these government agencies are more politicized, that Congress can't protect against that by putting, say, terms of office, which are not only common for a century and more in agencies set up by Congress, but are common across all of the states. It's not as if this is a peculiar federal weirdness and the states all know better. This is basic U.S. system of government rule one. And so a very big step for the Federalist Society so-called justices to kick that principle in the face by allowing Trump preliminarily to fire those key people while they took up the case later. Would have made a lot more sense to let the thing play out. But why would you want to give this president that power right now unless you were following big marching orders? And as you point out, the tell is, if you're doing this for the Koch brothers, for the big polluters, and for Wall Street, they love to be rid of regulation. They love to have politics that they control with their dark money take over independent agency decision making. But there's one place that terrifies them getting politicized, and that's the Fed, because they want a safe and stable economy to continue to grow in, to invest in, to pollute in, to do all of those things. So it's a huge tell when the justices kind of cross the street to add this asterisk to their decision saying, yeah, we're actually going to throw this out and let the president, this crooked president, fire these people and politicize these offices. And we mean it, as we've demonstrated it, by letting him fire them, but not the Fed. You know, they didn't have to say that. They didn't have to go there. Clearly, they have an audience that they're catering to, and that audience is Wall Street and the big polluters.
Yeah, it really is extraordinary because that decision, that precedent, Humphrey's Executor, has been on the books for 90 years through 22 presidential terms, where presidents have honored those guidelines about when you have an independent agency and not having presidential power to just fire people at these independent agencies that Congress creates. And as you point out, Senator, it is a direct assault on Congress's power. But here you see John Roberts.
And it's not just a single old decision sitting out there.
Right.
It has spawned an entire architecture of law across all of the circuit courts of appeal, across district courts around the country. It is a central premise of the way the American government works. It's not like this was some oddball decision that they went back and found and corrected after 90 years. This kicks out the central tentpole in the way the American system of government runs if they go through with their threat.
Yeah, it is just extraordinary. And you see that on the heels of the reversal of Chevron, on the heels of the reversal of Roe, that this Roberts court is actively trying to reverse the key precedents of the 20th century and even the 21st century in order to advance this agenda, this billionaire agenda. And as you point out, the tell is saying, yeah, everything is up for grabs. He can fire anyone, anywhere, but not the Fed, because you guys care about that the most. We're not going to let him muck that up, but everything else is fair game. It's extraordinary, and it's happening as the Supreme Court has repeatedly intervened in lower court decisions to stop temporary restraining orders, to stop the restraints that lower courts have put on while the cases, make their way through the courts, the merits get resolved. Instead, this court has been aggressively stopping a number of those, not all of them, but a number of those temporary restraining orders. Yeah. And that has also been met with these attacks by Trump and by the MAGA team, by Elon Musk and, people on X and other people threatening these judges. In fact, just this past week on Memorial Day, Trump issued a statement calling judges who ruled against him anti-U.S., anti-American. It's just extraordinary. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Well, two things on that. One, Trump is getting his ass kicked in the courts. I mean, a lot. He's losing almost all of his cases. And not only is he losing all the cases, but the language that courts are using to discuss his administration's performance in their courtroom is stunning and appalling. I've been a U.S. attorney. If my office had gone into court and people had used words like deliberate evasion or obstruction or bad faith or criminal contempt, we would have had like DEFCON 1 meetings, follow up, how what went wrong here. The way they're behaving in the courts is really getting the courts' backs up. And when you put on top of that the campaign of impeachment threats that is coming out of MAGA loons in the House of Representatives, and then you put on top of that the personal threats, not against judges, but also, I don't know why it seems to be daughters, family members, but mostly daughters, it seems. So, if you wanted to really piss off the American federal judiciary, it would be hard to do it better than they are doing it right now. There's a point where these threats backfire. Of course, the threats only backfire if the judges have confidence that the Marshals service is actually going to protect them. We had a cascade of threats into our Rhode Island court. Our judges are very satisfied with the way the Marshals service operated in that threat environment. They're comfortable that family members were also going to get whatever protection they needed. They felt very good about that. So the acid test is going to be the next steps. The Marshals service not only provides protection, but it's supposed to investigate the crime of threatening federal judges. And because so much of this looks orchestrated. I mean, did 60 or 70 people really decide in the same week that sending pizzas to the name of a judge's murdered family member to other judges around the country, they had that sudden brainstorm spontaneously? I don't think so. So there's huge, what a prosecutor would call predication for an investigation into conspiracy, RICO, orchestration of these threats. And the natural course of events for the Marshal Service would be to conduct that orchestration, that investigation, that bangs straight into Pam Bondi, the MAGA Attorney General. And the last thing she's going to want is a service that reports to her doing its job of investigating orchestrated threats if those threats are orchestrated by MAGA folks like Musk and Loomer and so forth. So be prepared for that collision that is coming. And by the way, the judges are a knowledgeable audience looking at the Marshals' behavior, because when the Marshals and other federal law enforcement agencies do criminal investigations, guess where they end up? In judges' courtrooms, where they see how they all play out. So they know perfectly well what a proper federal investigation is and isn't. And in this case, where they know that it's orchestrated, they've seen the orchestration, all the clues are there. If the Marshal Service won't go there, then that's going to be really, really a serious caution to the federal judiciary about the politicization of their own protection.
And Senator, as you point out, this is not hypothetical. We've seen real violence, fatal violence against judges and their families. When I was working with you on the Senate Judiciary Committee, we were able to work in a bipartisan fashion after that horrific attack on Judge Salas in New Jersey and her family and the murder of her son, Daniel Androl. We passed the Daniel Androl security bill to protect judges' personal information. And at this moment, what we're seeing is, it doesn't seem like Republicans in the Congress are going to stand up to protect judicial safety. There's also this related concern, safety is, I think, paramount, but we've got increasing incidents of defiance by the administration of judicial orders. And as you noted, invocation of criminal contempt. Enforcement of those contempt orders falls to the Marshals, who also report to Pam Bondi.
Yeah.
Against that backdrop, rather than get on board with efforts to figure out ways to protect the rule of law, protect judicial independence, what we've seen from House Republicans is an effort in the reconciliation bill to limit contempt enforcement, to basically neuter the ability of judges to issue nationwide injunctions and enforce contempt orders if their orders or if their injunctions are defied. So what do you make of the Republican caucus? In your committee, do you think there's potential for working across the aisle? I know they're under a huge amount of pressure from fringe elements like Bannon and the like, but when it comes to these questions, it seems like maybe there is some prospect. Could we get there?
Yeah. Well, first of all, don't underestimate the amount of pressure that they are under. Trump is surrounded with a bunch of real political thugs who don't hesitate to call people up and shout at them and yell at them and threaten them politically. And then you've got Musk, who has said publicly that he's willing to put a $20 million bounty on a Republican who does not hew to the party line in their next primary. And whoever wants to come in and primary them gets that $20 million to spend. So that's a pretty attention-getting threat. And then you have this curated, I believe, group of what I call the flying monkeys, the kind of Looney Tunes characters from their mother's basements around the country, who are gathered on X and will make really vile personal threats to people, not just judges. They make those really vile personal threats about family members to members of Congress as well. So you stack up the Trump thug threats, the Musk financial threats, and the flying monkeys with their really violent personal threats. It's a tough environment for them. But even in that environment, we saw that there is such a thing as too far when it became apparent that Tom Tillis was simply not going to vote for this creature, Ed Martin, who was the temporary U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia. And I can assure you that a significant number of the Republicans on the Judiciary Committee breathed a huge sigh of relief. and have privately thanked him and patted him on the back for sparing them the indignity of having to deal with letting that guy have official powers as a permanent U.S. attorney. So it's a very strange environment that they are in, but it is a uniquely threatening environment with a very, very rough bunch of people who don't care much for rule of law. They just want to win. They just want to expand their power. And they have zero respect for not just the decencies, but the fundamental structure of the American system of government.
Well, Senator Whitehouse, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a fascinating conversation. These issues are so nuanced and complicated. Things are so fast moving. The history is rich and sordid. And we find ourselves in an increasingly high temperature constitutional moment where this type of engagement we feel is just essential as people try to make sense of how all this affects their lives, what they can do to make things better. One maybe closing thought is that against that backdrop of political pressure and threats of violence, there is something we can do. We've got an amazing community here at Midas Touch Legal AF following these issues super closely. What do you think folks can do to maybe buck up the people like Tillis who, showed that courage in defeating Ed Martin? We've got another very toxic nominee, the kind of second coming of Roy Cohn and Emil Bove, who Trump made to the Third Circuit. But it feels like if we can maybe muster the type of political pressure and public outrage and organizing to be a counterweight to those types of pressures from the other side, maybe we can start to see the change we want, in these perilous moments.
Yeah. Well, as you can imagine, a lot of people come to me in distress and say, oh my God, what can I do? And I make the same recommendations pretty much to everybody. One is to get on your machine and go through your contacts list and find everyone you know in a state with a Republican senator. And if you feel comfortable asking them to make a constituent call or a constituent email or a constituent letter to that Republican senator, to please do that on whatever issue motivates you. Because even a MAGA or Republican senator cares about what they hear from their constituents. They don't necessarily care if you're in Florida, what you hear from a Rhode Islander, but you care when you hear from a Floridian or from a Mainer or from an Ohioan or a Pennsylvanian. So light up, activate your contacts list. Second, join up. You will feel better when you are engaged with like-minded people, and your voice will be amplified. I don't care what you join. Pick the principles and the values dear to you. Find a group that you think recognizes and amplifies those values and join up. You'll feel better for it. And the third is communicate stories, and particularly communicate stories to your representatives, because, we can say that cutting $800 billion out of Medicaid is a cruel and stupid thing to do, but it's a different thing when the rural hospital in so-and-so county in Nebraska has told its board of directors that if the cuts get this serious, they're going to have to close because they can't operate any longer. Or that this person has lost this benefit and this thing has happened in their lives. Stories matter. And very often it's the telling incident that can be the fulcrum upon which autocracy falls. It was that one guy in Tunisia who was so fed up with the corruption about his little food stand that he lit himself on fire, that became the thing that created the whole rebellion in that country and put the government out. So communicate those telling human stories, and one of them might become that telling moment. It might become the guy standing in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square.
Yeah. Wow.
Incredible. Yeah. Senator Whitehouse, Thank you so much for everything you're doing, for your courage and your leadership through the years. A great mentor to me and inspiration to all of us here.
Thank you, Alex. And Lisa's always been my hero. So I'm
Lisa's the best. Lisa is the guiding light for the work.
She does the hard work of bringing up the horrible information so that people like me can then display it to the world. But somebody had to be the miner to dig that stuff out of the secret dirt it's in. And bravo you.
Thank you, Senator.
All right. Well, friends here at Midas Touch Legal AF, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Until next time, stay mad, stay motivated, stay mighty. We're signing off.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.